Despite multiple failed attempts to buy the world's biggest island, America's strategy on Greenland is so genius that they got what they wanted anyway, and have already kind of owned it for 77 years. Here's how. Greenland was a colony of the joint crown of Denmark and Norway from 1721, and when that crown broke apart and the countries went their separate ways, Denmark took Greenland with them. The Danes doubled down on their exploitation of the island, establishing exclusive rights to trade with the local populations and convert them to Christianity, but the situation felt precarious. This was a messy divorce, and Norway could always come knocking for their half if Greenland started to look too profitable. So Denmark looked to the chess game of geopolitics for a solution and found a very willing partner, the United States. The US had become this huge global power, meaning that they knew that their recognition of any land ownership was a huge bargaining chip. They would give it to Denmark if the Danes had something worth offering, which they did. These islands in the Caribbean, they were once under Danish control, but today they're the US Virgin Islands because in 1916, the United States bought them for $25 million plus official on-paper US recognition that Greenland belongs to Denmark. That's a pretty valuable piece of paper. But also think of the timing of that treaty in 1916. You know, there hadn't even been a non-stop transatlantic flight yet, but the aerospace boom was coming. The Air Force had already been a big thing in the First World War, but nothing like the role it played later due to Second World War innovations that very quickly brought Greenland to centre stage. And if you look at a globe, you'll see why. The shortest transatlantic flight routes are all up near Greenland, and it's also the first stop if anybody wants to attack you across the North Pole. During the Second World War, Denmark was occupied by Germany, and some of their diplomats fled to the US in exile, which is a move that kind of ended up shaping our world today. While in Washington, they cut deals allowing the US to put air bases on Greenland and to keep extracting critical resources from its mines to help the Allied war effort, meaning Greenland was now effectively under US protection, but only as an emergency war measure. And in those years, they developed harbours and airfields that were so profitable for everybody, not just the US, but also Denmark, Canada, the UK, and so on. Even building more weather stations up there seems like a small thing, but it massively helped the Allies to plan invasions on mainland Europe, since Greenland's weather today is Europe's tomorrow. And there's also this insane war episode that they probably didn't teach you about in school either, where native Greenlanders go out in dog sled patrols and fight German soldiers who had snuck onto the glacier. This is, mad stuff, and Germany was trying to build their own illegal weather stations up on Greenland to get this data for themselves, and ended up getting killed by indigenous dog sledders. But yeah, that's one of the many stories that I want to tell in more detail on this channel in the future, so subscribe for that, while I explain just how genius America's next move is. By the end of the war, everybody had noticed that Greenland had gone from this icy backwater to a strategic golden goose overnight, and this was a development which fascinated President Truman so much that he immediately tried to buy Greenland in 1946 for $100 million, which is over $1 billion in today's money. Denmark said no, and the US respected that, which is pretty cool considering that the American military had just put in this Herculean effort literally months before, sacrificing so much and losing so many lives to help liberate Europe. But, you know, after all, there is that piece of paper from 30 years ago saying that a previous US administration in 1916 had agreed to say that Denmark owns Greenland. And nothing beats paper, except scissors, I guess. Which is a weird game if you actually think about it. But anyway, after this rejection, the US goes back to the drawing board and just 3 years later comes up with something even better than buying and owning Greenland. NATO. A new club where we'll all be there for each other. Particularly, Daddy US is committed to being there for us. And meanwhile, they profit too. We buy loads of stuff from their military-industrial complex for the sake of compatibility. And so, therefore, everybody wins, especially stockholders. But wait a second, it's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, so Denmark, why are you here as a founding member? Well, maybe it's because 98% of your land is in the North Atlantic, and the US really had such a good time putting stuff there during the war. Maybe if we let you under our cozy nuclear umbrella, you'll let us put stuff there again. Denmark agrees to join NATO, and the US negotiates this amazing deal where they keep the right to put as much stuff as they like on Greenland. So suddenly, in terms of defense, the juicy part that the war machine cares about, Greenland is actually on the same status as US land, without even having to buy it. That is a genius move, but it gets even better. Listen to this. So suddenly the winds of change are blowing through. The United States builds another international organization with one of its main aims being decolonization. Colonies go massively out of fashion, and indigenous people around the world are rising up and fighting to become equal citizens. And you'd have to say that compared to some colonizers, Denmark goes along with that movement relatively well. Greenlanders earned themselves 2 seats in the parliament in Copenhagen, and even a proto-independence treaty with a clause saying that if they vote to leave Denmark, Copenhagen can't stand in their way. And in the meantime, it's Denmark who is the evil colonizer who still has an empire. It's Denmark who is rightly being made to pay for some horrendous scandals where they mistreated native people. It's Denmark dealing with establishing democracy and roadworks and bin collections on a glacier. It's Denmark who provides icebreaking and coast guard services 2,000 miles from their capital. And it's Denmark who sends $600 million of aid a year to prop up an EU quality of life and free healthcare and university education on a frozen island without much economic activity. All 5 things for as long as Greenlanders want, until they decide to trigger that clause and leave. Compared to other colonial powers who've also committed horrendous sins and killed people in years gone by, that is insanely benevolent. Like, Greenlanders really fought for one of the best deals ever. Nobody's ever seen anything like this before. Oh, and it's Denmark who, whenever the US asks them to, will send its people to their defence, with some of the highest per capita losses of any country in NATO. But all of that is why American strategy on Greenland is so genius. Not only did they not have to buy it, they don't have to run it. Civilian life, Denmark carried that particular can for all of us for so long. Greenlanders are the ones actually out there fighting every day for better recognition and eventual freedom, but the US still gets what it wants. The right to carry on putting air and even space bases there anyway. Not to mention the fact that the Americans actually got away with accidentally dropping a nuke on Greenland once too. Like, not the capital city nuke, like a nuke. That's actually another story I'd love to tell in more detail on this channel later, so if you like empire stories, make sure that you subscribe. In the meantime though, another frozen wasteland that accidentally triggered geopolitical strife is Mount Everest. And if you don't know that story, then click here to watch it next.